6 Fathoms, Sci-Fi and Eldritch Progression Fantasy. By Broken Saint. 1. The Bold Man's End. The day the last human emperor perished, the universe breathed its first sigh of relief. Then it wept, for while its tormentors were gone, so were the only stewards of order. I still remember that day. The day the stars lost their light and the waters of Phlegethon took their place. Yarnan, Anomaly 0, year 3031, in his Codex of War. One last job. Dante loathed such boasts and phrases. They were signs of bad luck, misfortune, and death. 9 times out of 10, it ended in the speaker's untimely demise. The others, they always screwed him over, without fail. Why? Because he was human, and in his own words, ain't nobody liked a human in 1,000 standards. They still watch his people's shows, read their books, and even name their kids with the names of his kin. The largest remaining empire even modelled itself after one of his ancient ancestors. But nobody cares for humans like me. Once more, Dante's former allies sentenced him to die and left him with only one heated body by his side, proving the brutal truth. The worst part? Translators could seldom understand that last man. After a kinetic round of depleted uranium lodged itself in his leg, Dante dragged himself around a box of smuggled goods meant for the Reichschi sector of the wings, while bullets riddled his cover instead of his crewmate. He never asked what the goods were or what they were for. He checked them, sure, but just a quick once-over. And with some things, he let Damon do it all. This time, he cursed that he hadn't. Beside him, crouched behind the overturned steel of their dinner table, as kinetic and electromagnetic rounds flew overhead, Dante cursed at one of his so-called partners. "Fucking Reggio, you gonna turn tail too?" The Ariki, with his blood-red skin identical to those of demons from Dante's books as a child, chuckled with his head bouncing jarringly against the box. Shaking his flapping mouth tendrils, the alien from a million light-years away nodded toward Dante's wound. Their brain chips translated the conversation, as neither knew the other's language, while the alien spoke. "Not my style. Uman, Tuaccioni on the line. You gonna be fine. I'd already croaked if I'd uranium in me." Dante exhaled with a stinging pain while reloading his revolver, annoyed by the imperfect translation. Arrakis were too rare for perfect calibration. The man racked his brain in thought, ignoring the agony and frustration as he crafted a plan for survival. Others panic in such situations. Dante's brain sped up, and his heart turned cold. Like the enduring roaches that outlived the rest of humanity's history. The cold metal beneath him, that of the Starsinger, mirrored his heart, cold and calculating. For now, slow death's curse. Next move is to make it to the skull. I think the captain we hired's already eating stardust. I could set us into a dive for a nearby planet, but I need time. He closed the revolver's specialized cylinder with a sharp clasp. It was the same weapon his father had given him, the one that led him into this trade. Reggio's mandibles clacked in response, the 8 sharp tendrils of chitin dancing across his mouth. He checked his weapon. Its coils were already hot, just like the Iraqi's spirit, as he shouted, "Sounds like a ride. I'll lead the Arge, then follow with your leg." Reggio, as expected, agreed to the assault on their own ship with brief hesitation. Dante scoffed. There was a reason Reggio was here instead of back on his backwater planet. Unlike the rest of his kind, peaceful agriculturalists, Reggio was an adrenaline junkie with a penchant for exotic firearms. Critical in times like these, though it had gotten them into trouble before. The Ready never thought before he acted, and this attack was no different. However, amongst all those Dante had ever worked with, he did trust Reggio the most. The man idolized him, and Dante knew it. Dante dashed out first, well aware that Reggio had no clue how to navigate to the ship's skull. Projectiles, beams, and radiation streaked toward the rear of his frame as he sprint-limped across the circular room to the hallway. Without looking back, he fired off shots, the implant in his head honing his already prodigious skill. 4 bodies hit the ground before his cylinder hummed empty. Twisting around the corner, something warm and wet spread across his stomach. Dante's back slammed against the wall as his breath came short and wheezing. He shook his head, fighting to clear it. "Can't die now. Can't. Won't. I still gotta. Regio snapped Dante's eyes to focus on the chittering sound of his translated voice. Dante, you don't look well. Sure you'll ache it to the skull? Dante nodded, confident in his temporary survival. Yeah, now stop asking. Just a little further. I've got a present for Damon's nasty friends. Dante unclipped a round object from his belt with bloody fingers, the leather and flesh beneath scorched from a laser strike. Thankfully, most creatures were terrified of augments, so only one hit him because of their shitty inaccuracy. Their bodies often rejected such things. Humans? Some pills will cover it. There was nothing like the human body or the experiments their scientists once did to further their kind. While Dante wasn't a Martian, the subspecies of man, nigh unkillable by anything less than large ordnance, he was one tough bastard with his implants. But Dante wasn't thinking about that, not even about the woman who did this to him. As he tossed the fragmentation grenade down the hallway, limping toward the skull, now only a short distance away. Instead, the smuggler, bounty hunter, and bleeding-out body cursed his shitty luck over this package. Damned Desnovians, pay me 100,000 credits to transport dirge material. That's a fucking job for a seafarer, not me or my crew. At least offer 10 times the rate. Dante's thoughts swarmed with curses and anger. He wasn't qualified for this. He wasn't supernatural. Just an experimental human. I ain't special. Can't warp time. Can't come back to life. Fuck, I ain't even as tough as my old man. I've got an hour, maybe 2, without seeing a medrack. Let's hope Reggio and I are fast enough. The augments in his knees pushed him forward, tiny embedded steel and springs driving flesh step by step. Gunfire and echoes of a swift battle rang out from the attackers, ending the few who weren't awake before chaos struck. The sounds beat against the featureless grey walls as the two ran harder than ever before. Thankfully, the Iraqi sensed the ambush before they reached the next turn. Look ahead, Dante. I've on the right. Dante nodded to his partner. The past 13 months they spent together built trust that, to his surprise, was unbroken by greed, so he flipped his revolver over, reloading as he limped forward. The human stole the first step around the corner, aiming for shock and awe. With adrenaline steadying his bloodied hands, Dante greeted his 5 ambushers with a deathly smile. Behind you. The Gorshas, with their tusks and dark skin, barely registered his words, but his trickery bought him the fraction of a second he needed. Fanning the revolver, he shot 2 chunks of lead into each of the 3 Gorshas, piercing their armor. Screams of pain and anger filled the air before Reggio blasted one of the Gorshas' brains with captured lightning, then slammed his recharging weapon into the last attacker, again and again. Reggio howled at the body long after it ceased moving. Die, bastard. Air. Ha. Tangerine-colored blood flooded the grey hallway, reminding Dante of childhood and the sweet taste of fruit. Wooziness gripped him for a moment before the taste of blood in his mouth snapped him back to reality. Focus, you dimwit. Control yourself. Follow me. We have little time before whoever paid for Damon's betrayal shows up. Dante hauled the Iraqi off the body, barking orders to get him into line. Dante pressed one hand against his unburnt wound to staunch the bleeding. Meanwhile, the other reloaded his revolver with swift precision, inserting the specialty rounds. He cursed his luck under his breath, uncertain of his future. Fuck. If we don't get this ship into the light sea soon, we'll have 100 more of them to kill. I swear, after this, I'm getting a new crew. Maybe I'll fly the ship myself instead of paying for a pilot. Reggio's a given, though. Might even give him 1 free betrayal pass after all this shit. As they neared the skull, the heart of the Starsinger, the walls shifted into interlocking plates with sealed doors on either side. Voices echoed in Dante's ringing ears as he hinged the corner. Get us the fuck out of here. You have a live godspawn on board. I thought it was a quali in an immortal corpse. Panic locked up the augments in Dante's legs. His bloodied hand gripped the back of Reggio's armor as the mechanical enhancements shrieked in protest. Yet his mind stuttered worse than his failing internals. A godspawn, a star-eater, a dirge, a living quali. Those words echoed without a sound in Dante's mind. The last time he'd heard of a Star Eater, his father didn't come home. His blooded hands trembled with emotions too powerful to put into meaningful sentences. Rage, excitement, confusion, horror, and greed. Weak godspawn, dirge, whatever one would call them existed, of course, yet no one would smuggle them like this. Those, most often dead or captured, would be transported with small containers. Whatever was in here was strong. Very strong. Reggio whispered to Dante, his tendrils flapping in fury and bewilderment at the human's actions. "What are you doing? They've a godspawn. This is our chance to strike it itch. No more smuggling. We'd both be seafarers in no time." Dante scoffed at Reggio's reasoning but didn't shut him down. Everyone knows there are no bounds to human greed, but even humans at the height of their power were wary of these space leviathans. He released Reggio slowly, warning him with every inch as he said, "If we survive, maniac, I've been doing this for 10 standards since I was 16. There's nothing more dangerous than dealing with quali. They're the devil. We're better off turning tail and running. You humans and superstition. They're just dimensional creatures. Nothing we can't handle or haven't before," Reggio said as the mighty Reddy strutted forward without fear, beckoning Dante to follow. While the Iraqi was right, they had fought dimensional entities before. They'd never dealt with anything from the light sea. That was a different beast. The strongest kind. Even their weakest were fatal in most encounters. Dante and his superstition halted at the corridor's edge. His body shivered. It was the coldest he had ever felt in his life, not even the virus he survived as a kid compared. Nor when he endured 6 gunshot wounds 2 standards ago. Nothing compared to this. Then he realized this was the moment that could change everything. He wouldn't be just another smuggler anymore, moving cargo in constant fear of opposition, hiding from the Empire's investigations into his race. Sure, he was skilled, but even a human was powerless against many forces in the galaxy. He had once seen a woman turn a town-sized starship into a ball the size of a fist with flowing waters. It all started with the dirge of the light sea. Well, not with them, but they were the strongest and most prevalent of the interdimensional beings. Their dimension was the largest and most terrifying that existed. The quali harvested from their bodies or eggs gave Dante hope. A future with no set destination, but one far better than his current life. And so he scrambled after Reggio, ignoring his lethal wounds. Humans were tough, arguably the most resilient species in the cosmos to occur naturally. But there were limits. Blood loss, shock, and organ failure prickled at the edges of his mind. Reaching into his pocket as his eyes scanned the skull's surroundings, Dante stopped to tend to his wounds. He pulled a syringe from his coat and injected pure adrenaline into his veins in tandem with a dozen other chemicals that would have put someone like Reggio down within seconds. He needed that boost to stand a chance against the woman waiting for him in the next room. A long box, etched with unknown words and sigils, sat in the center of the skull, surrounded by chairs and screens. The open window to the cosmos, showing featureless space, loomed behind Daran and his lackeys, 2 of whom Dante once would have trusted with his life. Keyword, trusted. The Gorsha, in Dante's muddled mind of greed, hatred, and confusion, pivoted to face him, momentarily stunned by his condition and Reggio's sudden arrival. He pointed at them both, shouting for Yesha and Ide to kill the attackers. Before diving for cover, Reggio spewed forked lightning from his weapon at Ide, a Gorsha much like Daran. Meanwhile, the chems boiled in Dante's blood. Time seemed to slow, his pupils dilating, his hands steadying with unnatural firmness. It had been months since Dante hadn't felt the shake. He hated it. But sometimes, there were too few ways to survive than cheating. Yesha spun the barrels on her rifle, aiming at Dante's brow. He would admit that few shooters in the outskirts of the stars were on his level. This Urgan, with her lithe body and scaled tail, was one of them. Nevertheless, Dante was a cheater. Anything to win, anything to survive, anything to reach the center of the galaxy. Anything, absolutely anything. He would degrade himself, ruin himself, and even push himself to the razor's edge of oblivion. Why? He oft asked himself that very question. Yet he had no solution to such a complex equation. Dante's revolver rose with such swiftness that Yesha only fired 1 shot in response. His augments alongside the drugs overpowered his blood loss and injuries. As a result, the Urgan woman collapsed to the ground, twin holes in her eyes. Dead. A projectile slammed into Dante's left side, tearing away a chunk of his flesh, but he didn't slow. Step by step, he advanced on Daran, while Rayu kept the other former ally occupied. He should have known better. Friends were never easy to come by. Friendships, lasting ones, were formed by debts of blood, life, and inexorable circumstances. All those on this ship, except for one, received payment instead of companionship. Money meant little to one's lifeblood. Seldom would someone not turn to the highest bidder. At least he still had Rajo, the strange Iraqi who possessed a dozen first names and a barely comprehensible accent. With a gasp of desperation, Daran reached for Irgan's rifle, but Dante shot his left hand before he could get close. Then, careful not to kill the cowardly rat, he smashed Daran's skull with the handle of his revolver. Bones cracked in the air as thick orange fluid leaked down his greyish skin. Daran damn near pissed himself, throwing up his hands in dismay while he said, "Wait, wait, don't kill me, I can help you." Dante grinned, sanguine fluid pooling on the colourless steel beneath him as he pointed at the box behind Daran. The sounds of Rajo winning his fight filled him with satisfaction, but the dread of what lay inside the box overshadowed them. Dante didn't recall allowing that thing on board. "How can you help me?" "By sneaking a godspawn onto my ship, by lying and deceiving my entire crew about what we were transporting." "Clever, hiding the goods beneath the chems. You knew I wouldn't touch them. Addiction and all." Dante spat out his hatred, staring down the soon-to-be dead man who used to oversee the smuggling of goods, without a shred of concern for his own life. Often Dante couldn't stand to look at the things he smuggled. But he had limited choices. There weren't many jobs for humans, and now it had all led to staring down at this pitiful shit-stain of a man. The Gorsha, with one broken tusk and the other bejeweled, babbled promises to save his hide. "No, no, no, you don't understand. They forced me. The Federation of Flesh." "You're working with those psychos, the ones who worship Star-Eaters," Dante said sharply, cutting him off. Daran shook his head, then nodded begrudgingly. It seemed he might tell part of the truth as he spoke. "Yes, not willingly. They have my daughter. Said she was talented with tides. I didn't know who they were until... Yeah. Just kill me. Better that than..." The forlorn father's voice trailed off as the strength drained from his shoulders, leaving his words unfinished. But Dante was not done yet. He roughly snatched the man's knotted hair, forcing him to respond. "What? Better than what? Is there something wrong with the dirge?" A grim smile met the human's chem-laced breath before the last of a dying species lost his cool. Partly because of his drug-fueled rampage and because of the meaning behind that smile. A fist smashed into Daran's face thrice before his breathing stopped and his eyes closed. Broken and misshapen, Daran crumpled to the floor as Rajo touched Dante's trembling shoulder. Dante spun around, his fury scarcely contained, but he reined it in before striking his only ally on the Starsinger. Despite his lust for battle, Rajo seemed concerned for Dante. His gaze flicked to the blood, dripping from the human, and asked, "What's wrong?" A bouquet of laughter escaped Dante as he stumbled toward the screens in the center of the room. He struggled to reach the pilot's seat, shoving aside the body of the pilot he had hired. He hated flying, especially into the light sea. It brought back unsavory memories from when the drugs had their worst hold on him. But now was not the time for such recollections. Dante glanced at Rajo, then back at the coffin-shaped box, an almost fatalistic acceptance settling over him. Most quaile are dead, ready to be harvested, but this one's alive. We don't even know what kind it is. It's special, and only one thing could be wrong with a live dirge like this. Sweat dripped from his brow as he spoke their ill fate aloud. "It's not sealed right. Maybe it can't even be sealed. That means..." The beetroot color drained from Rajo's face as even the fearless warrior understood Dante's following words. "Its mother will come. And the Federation are the only ones insane enough to invade with dirge. We're one solar away from Sci-Fi, the sector furthest on the border and a hub for travel." Rajo dropped into a seat, eyes fixed on the coffin, scanning for any sign of leakage with desperation. He found none, but he wasn't an expert. No one he knew was. The Iraqi confronted the silent human, pleading with him for how to live. As he spoke, "What in? Damon's men are still oming, and who knows when the mother will show. I don't want my brain earned to slush and my body harvested for conceptual organs. It's not a yertifaleth. You ought to know something, Dante. You ways do." The translation device in Dante's brain glitched as usual while the Iraqi prayed for survival. Dante avoided looking at Reggio, but answered him anyway, tapping instructions into the ship's guidance system and leaving bloody fingerprints with every press while he said, "We're entering the light sea with no protection. If we're lucky, the parent will take its child while we traverse the higher dimension, and the ones coming after us will be slowed down. If we're unlucky." He left the rest unsaid as the ship began to hum and pulse with energy. The ship overrode its controls under Dante's ministrations and deactivated the shields used for traveling through the light sea, one of the most dangerous regions in all realities. A typical suicide move for failed captains. Reggio stared into Dante's eyes as the man stood again, the chems driving him forward to Death's Landing. Reggio searched for any sign of dishonesty or bluffing, but found none. With a resigned exhale, he raised his weapon toward the open gateway and stated, "Sit your ass-ack down. I'll hold them off. Get us the fuck out of her." Rushing footsteps echoed in the distance, panicked and frantic over the pilot's choices. They had assumed Dante and Reggio would die at the Skull, especially with Dante injured and shaking, given that Yesha had bested them in every competition over the past standard. They had underestimated the tenacity of a final human. Dante's gaze drifted from the coffin and the display screens to the glass outside the Starsinger. His mind wandered into the great beyond as colors stretched and shadows dissolved. The vast cosmos vanished, replaced by every vibrant shade imaginable as strange creatures drifted beyond the sturdy glass. He couldn't tear his gaze from the light sea, the drugs narrowing his focus to a pin spike. The coffin beside him rattled. Then it did again, with more force this time. Whatever was inside begged to be released. Despite it, he didn't move. He knew he should have, but he didn't. His body trembled with unseen agony, an unfulfilled promise, and the presence of something monstrous. His mind had one sole thought as his body broke down. It's already here. 12 taps of something horrific landed on his shoulders as the waves of the light sea tore into his body. It shouldn't have been possible, the glass hadn't broken, but Dante's flesh and bones felt like putty under the pressure. An incomprehensible mind invaded his own. The words weren't meant to be understood, not by any mortal creature, least of all Dante Penance. Pure, raw, unfiltered misery surged through his brain, searing its way through him, forcing change, forcing understanding. Something inside him would never be the same, and the being didn't care. Flashes of cursed faces, ruined bodies, and desolate planets wove their way into his mind. A mint-green sea the size of countless suns burnt his irises while a tidal wave of blood engulfed an entire city, devouring its inhabitants before spiraling around him at the apex. Above, there was crimson. Below, there was darkness. In his hands, though, there was understanding. What delicious suffering! A shadow lengthened, a life prolonged. For now, I find you to be a treat. More than that, you will be useful as a favor, a fly leaping from rat to rat. May my children enjoy the pangs of you and yours for a while longer. 2. In death's dark wake. This council decrees the eradication of all humans from the universe. The danger they pose to reality far outweighs any possible benefit. Henceforth, anyone who harbors a human will face a swift death. It matters not what they may have done in the past, nor the heights they reached. Humankind possesses a limitless capacity for malice, freely exploited by the spawn lurking in the echoes of lost dimensions and the sins that had been birthed by time. They must be exterminated. Congress of Praetors, 3rd Amendment, year 3068. Pale lights flickered above 2 motionless sentients, surrounded by blaring alarms and malfunctioning systems. Nearby, electricity crackled from frayed wires as the starship trembled. The noise was loud enough to wake the dead, yet it only stirred Rejo from his sleep. By blinking rapidly, the Iraqi activated his double-layer lenses to overcome his weariness. He coughed, expelling something from his chest, but turned to his captain first. His concern was evident, a rare gesture for Rejo for anyone who was not his captain. He did not share his emotions regularly beyond the plain ones. While stretching out his arm toward Dante, he checked his pulse. Doing so, he witnessed the human gasping for air, his lungs caving in desperate need. Rejo leapt back, startled by the sudden movement. Worse yet were Dante's eyes. The Iraqi's thoughts fell to the man's condition without thought of his own. Not good at all. Captain can't die. What can I do? Rejo wasn't an expert on humans. No one alive was that he knew of. People often replaced body parts without much training, yet it usually worked out. However, he knew their eyes shouldn't have black in the white sclera. A low growl rumbled from the human's throat, reverberating through the cacophony of alarms. Cracks spider-webbed across the window of the skull, but Dante's aura somehow momentarily held the Starsinger together against the light sea. It lasted only a second before he regained consciousness, the darkness in his eyes fading. Dante pounded his chest repeatedly as his mind spun in panic, struggling to save himself. Something wormed its way into his soul, digging through his memories, failures, and pain. The day his father left replayed as he watched dozens of friends die all at once. The flashes focused on his failures, each one leading to death, culminating in his younger brothers. It was a life that ended too quickly, a shared dream of adventure that was robbed from both. Then came his addiction. It was the one evil he had never fully overcome. He couldn't escape. Every time he thought he was past them, something would drag him back, spiraling him toward an early grave. They were always an easy way out, a short path to victory, or sometimes the only road. Thousands of gunshots echoed through the haze of his chems of choice. The brutal stimulant that heightened physical strength, shifter, mixed with sparsan, vibrating the muscles to further enhance speed. Both were fused into his combat amps with nerve fire, which set his senses ablaze, making everything sharper and worse. Unfortunately, this was his only dose of the combat drug, a contingency plan he'd hoped never to use. The months of running himself ragged from mission to mission without a resupply had dug into his reserves. It had been a long time since this brand had eaten into his psyche. Worse still, the greatest evil arrived, and his entire being trembled. Nullify. All of Dante's emotions, except for hurt, pain, and loss, vanished into the great sea of light. Tears streamed down his face as a voice entered his ears, as loving as his former fiancée, yet as cruel as a torturer. How delightful. I simply needed a taste for myself. I'll leave the rest for you three. Goodbye. Abruptly, the horror and misery halted as Dante's face slammed into the cold steel of the Starsinger's skull. There, he gazed out the window at the worst sight of his strife-filled career in the stars. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him, stopped by a nightmare more terrifying than anything he had ever imagined, even in his most agonized withdrawals. A spider. No, an unimaginably massive creature with 16 legs and a pitch-black body coiled around the star near Gadron, the planet he had jumped to, cutting off much of its light. Tendril-like limbs sank into the celestial entity, devouring a being birthed by the universe itself. The star, much like his own people's sun, shivered and dimmed within seconds. Terror steadied Dante's hands on the floor, adrenaline overriding his trauma. His eyes narrowed, his muscles tensed. An instinctual reaction to the otherworldly entity. Beside him, the Iraqi trembled, equally unsure of what was happening. Dante, what is that? Rejo hissed through clenched teeth, his fists cowering. Before Dante could react, the starship quivered, and he understood why. It wasn't the malfunctioning systems or the risky light-sea excursion, it was retaliation. Sparkling lights veered toward the monstrous creature, devouring the star's light. Dante didn't dare to ponder its name. Squinting, he could almost believe some of those lights were humanoid figures, not just lasers like the others. Seafarers. They're all going to die. Check the shields. I'll fix the bright map. Dante ordered his last remaining crewmate into action. Upon stepping toward the flickering screens, he noticed the bodies in the room. They were bodies that hadn't been there before. What? How did they die? If they died, then... Why is Reggio alive? 3. What did it mean by that? Cruel chills gripped Dante's heart, and he could no longer handle it anymore. Between the blood loss, the betrayals, and the god within his mind, using it like a playground, he reached under the captain's station. After drawing out a small vial with dark purple liquid, its label scrubbed out to disguise its contraband nature, Dante swirled it before proceeding to grab the syringe stored with it. Just as he raised the needle to his neck, however, the possible godspawn drawled out a question to the human. "What are you wearing? I thought you promised to never do those again. Didn't you ash them away?" "I always have backups, for everything," Dante said plainly as he turned to face Reggio as the liquid coursed through his veins. Instantly the voices stopped. The endless chattering in his brain went silent. The constant flood of thoughts and worries froze. Only under Nullify is he his authentic self, focused, perfect, of one whole mind. It was in this supreme concentration that he stared down Reggio. Others took drugs to sharpen their minds and enhance speed. Dante had to slow down, forcing unnecessary thoughts to pause so he could work at peak efficiency. Fear evaporated, and so did his grief. For 1 hour, he was free. A free Dante was a force of nature, unabated under any storm. "You are not Reggio." The Iraqi twisted his head, nearly invisible dark dots rolling across his skin, confused by Dante's words. Whatever Dante had seen didn't immediately reveal itself, even as he pointed at the blood-red sentient. Dante pressed on, his voice sharp as he spoke. "Reggio had a scar under his chin, another on his left hand. You have neither. What are you?" With his back to the monitors, Dante leveled his revolver at his crew member. The Iraqi's face twisted with betrayal and hurt, still pretending to be Reggio. Just as Dante cocked the hammer, a noise from above caught his attention. There was a vibration in the vent. Dante, while squinting his bloodshot eyes, heard a commotion inside the air duct before a body dropped through the hatch, slamming into the floor. This creature was small, humanoid, but more dwarf-like than the average sentient being. The figure waved its hands frantically, panicking as it said, "Wait, wait. That's still Reggio, and you're still Dante Penance. Relax, relax." Dante barely glanced at her while she pleaded for the two not to fight, his focus still on Reggio. "Why should I believe you? Who are you? One of Damon's? Son of a bitch. You were in the vents the whole time." Dante drew another pistol from behind a monitor, this one aimed at the 4-foot-tall woman. With both weapons drawn, one at a former friend, the other at a stranger, Dante's mind scrambled for a way to survive. "I am Sonna Herel, but that doesn't matter. You both have Quali inside you, Godspawn, Stare-Eaters, Dirge. Whatever you call them, you now possess divine powers bestowed by a great old one. You must spread the gospel of the Federation. There's so much you two can do now." Sonna boasted about futures she couldn't possibly guarantee, her bold tone betraying a hint of doubt. Even as Sonna explained, Dante's mind was racing. He calculated the fastest path to the Medrack, the shots he'd need, whether he'd have to get new augments, and his chance of survival when it was all over. Dante half wanted to pull the trigger, to be done with her. She had to be part of the crew that brought this to the star system. She knew too much, far too much. And we're stuck in shit together. I can work with her for now. Plus, what if she's a seafarer? Dante glanced at Reggio, motioning for him to continue prepping the Starsinger for the jump into the light sea. "Sonna, why were you in the vent? And how were you in my vent?" Another jump was risky in the ship's current state, but as the window, designed to withstand Petrifier-class cannons, cracked further, Dante set down both weapons. Their priority was leaving, not fighting. He could deal with the rest later. To hide, obviously. I knew the Quali would hatch since we left it partially open on purpose. A thick enough casing made from powerful dirge corpses can hide someone from the light sea. Regrettably, you killed the man who knew the whereabouts of the other. Not that I'm upset about his death, didn't like him much. He was Awful, Sonna said as she strolled over, but she stopped well before reaching the trigger-happy human, wagging a finger mockingly at Damon's corpse. This woman, I will despise her by the end of this. Already irritated by his new companion, Dante finished prepping the bright map with a series of calculations and risk assessments that would guide the ship through the dangerous light sea. From the other side of the room, Reggio shouted, his voice amplified by the power surges lighting the room without shields. All good over here. We're ready to jump. Dante nodded and glanced back out the window. The star's light, which had shone just moments ago, had vanished noiselessly. Through the fractured glass, Dante stared in awe at the spinning orb of darkness. In the vast void of space, beams of energy fired at the divine being from thousands, maybe millions of starships. But they had no effect. Space itself trembled as even the most powerful seafarers unleashed their terrible powers to no avail. Oceans of water, mountains of ice, and atmospheres of steam rushed forward to no avail. Maybe if the monsters hidden in the depths of the galaxy near the Great Cavity were here, it would have been different. Dante couldn't be certain, though. All he knew was that he had to run, his thumb already slamming into the ignition as the ring of darkness closed in, snuffing out any light it touched. Colors warped, and Dante's whole body vibrated with sickness. This jump in Lightsea felt unlike the previous ones. Something inside him reached out, swabbing his soul. It slithered into his brain, digging up his deepest emotions and traumas. But it wasn't the old one from before. This was the child. Was it the one from the coffin? Dante wasn't so sure. It seemed wrong. He didn't know how or why, but it didn't feel right. As if to prove his point, it devoured pieces of him he wished had never existed inside his soul. But it couldn't take them completely. They were buried too deep. Instead, a shrieking howl erupted from deep within his core, as it almost seemed that the thing found a competitor. It was a howl of pain, suffering, and untold ages of agony to come. It sounded wrong, unnatural. Whatever was inside him fed on that negativity, thriving on it. Despite its noise, however, it suddenly went silent as the colors returned to normal. Somehow, Dante experienced a sense of renewal. Not entirely new, but far better than the near-death, chem-addled wreck he'd been before. Beyond the state he found himself in, the sensations crawled over him with a profound wrongness. He couldn't pinpoint what it was, yet it made him feel sick through the relief. He glanced down at his hands and found them shaking, just like earlier that day. A weary sigh left his lungs as it was all back. A voice intruded into his thoughts without his permission, saying, "I see. So that's your stigmata. Some form of regeneration, perhaps. Reggio's must be similar with those dots. However, it is not identical. Tell me, what do you feel?" Dante twisted to face Sonna as the star-singer sped toward a city planet, still half an hour away. The clarity from Nullify had vanished, and panic crept back in. In a display of frustration, he mustered the shortest response he could to Sonna's question. A simple, "Yes, I feel better." A part of Dante knew better. This curse wasn't healing. It was something far more complicated. As he glanced at his hand, he noticed that the cut from this morning's breakfast was absent, while yesterday's sparring scab lingered. Between 12 and 36 hours. I reset myself that far through time. I hate it. It feels wrong. Is that normal? Dante's mind drifted to the pull of the chems. They no longer gripped his body, but they clung to his thoughts. With this power, he could abuse them freely, as much as he wanted. Mine ain't healing, Dante. I'm not sure what happened, but I blanked out. What happened after we jumped? And who is this Earl? She seems suspicious, Reggio said, and unaware of the past several minutes, turned to Dante for answers. The wounds Dante had pointed out before. They were back, scars and all. The observation chilled the human to his bones, keeping his mind struggling. What? The lights. Dante reached for his hidden stash of Nullify, but stopped short. With a shake of his head, he compelled reality to conform, causing something to distort after a brief contest. He realized the sparring scar was gone, but now his mind throbbed with pain. He stumbled to the side and heard Sonna's rambling cut through the haze. Whoa! I know new seafarers sometimes activate their stigmata by accident in the light sea, but you just triggered it again. That can't be right. No one's that skilled to start. Look me in the eye. Sona's beady eyes locked onto Dante's as he braced himself, feeling like he might expel whatever he'd eaten in the last 24 to 72 hours. Her face twisted in confusion before she whipped out a small beeping device. The device beeped softly beside Reggio, but when she aimed it at Dante, it screeched like a newborn. The war-forged Iraqi misstepped in sadness while Sona's smug smile grew even broader. "Oh my, I had you marked as a Tianxia. What in the lights are you? Let's see. Pale skin, 6'3", 220 pounds, oddly resilient. By the lights, I helped orchestrate a human getting a qualii into their veins." Sona collapsed to the floor, her bug eyes wide with shock, alabaster skin almost glowing, while her hands stuck to her face. The once confident woman's facade shattered. All the bravado she had shown previously was gone in the wind. A hand slapped Dante's shoulder, and Reggio, ever the compassionate killer for hire, stated, "Yep, he's a human. First one I've ever seen. But what's so bad about that?" Sona scrambled backward in horror, her spine hitting the wall with a thud. Dante's mind slowly churned to life, piecing together the rumors and legends. The man steadied his exhaustion by blinking thrice until his vision cleared. "That's why I couldn't reach the galaxy's center. My damn species, the hunts are fairly mild out here, but deeper. People aren't so lax. I'll be executed for this. No trial, no nothing. A judge will be sent. We need to run. Now." Dante strode forward and crouched beside the lithe, terrified woman. She looked up at him, her once confident face now twisted with fear as a toothy grin spread across his own. "We're not allowed to have these things, huh? How is that any worse than destroying a sun? Planets and a sun. That thing will kill billions by tomorrow. Not that we can stop it, or do anything about it, actually." Dante stated the facts of their situation calmly before Sona finally managed to speak. He couldn't understand how any of it made sense. "My organization answers to a higher power, but even that power has outlawed humans with stigmata. That thing, I don't know what it was, but surely we can control it. As for you, the abilities from higher dimensions are born from emotions, particularly negative ones, and you humans." Sona trailed off while Dante finished her words. The numbers added up in his brain as he saw the answers to the equation. The problem was him. It always had been. "We declared war on the universe, nearly won too. We're as awful as they come. 3 beyond mercy's reach. Our survival depends on our collective strength, not the power of a select few. If you believe otherwise, then stake out on your own in some distant sector. See how you endure. I won't join you. My duty as legate is to protect our people and the peoples of this galaxy. It seems you've forgotten that in your sudden rise to power. May whatever god deceived you into abandoning our empire's people have mercy on your soul. Because if I return, I will have none." Legate Swain, in her declaration against Legate Richter after the former absconded from Rome to investigate other dimensions, the Empire of Marble, year 3067. Dante walked away from the conversation, his hands squeezing the sides of the bright map at the center console of the ship's skull. His focus sharpened as the unimportant thoughts faded into the background. "So hat now, Dante. Do we stay here? Become kings with Aru powers and hide from the warring empires in the far reaches of the galaxy? Sounds like a good life to me, better than being hunted down and turned to dust," Reggio inquired, not bothering to glance at Sona, focused on his sole friend. The former captain of the ship shook his head while Sona sputtered in disbelief, trying to get them to listen. Neither did. "No, Reggio, we're not doing that. I have no desire to become royalty. I know you don't either. We've done odd jobs for years, long before you joined, Sona. It's always been small time, smuggling, breaking aristocrats out of prison." Sona slapped her hand to her face as Dante continued, "Out here in the wings, we've been limited to small-time jobs. But toward the heart, that's where the real action is. We can finally join the real galaxy. Picture it, us walking along Luminant Ave, free to eat where we want. Enter a planet without a strip search. To live without fear." As the man finished speaking, he turned to face them, causing the broken monitors to flicker to life and display the galaxy. A generous smile laced Dante's face, while the man's brain spun at the speed of light-sea travel. The weaves within his thoughts worked more similarly to the chaotic nature of the light sea than a typical person. He understood the risk and that people would hunt him, more than usual, for being human with such powers. After all, we were the first ones to bring them here, the light sea and all the other minor realms. Who says we can't fetch more? I don't care. I don't want to die. There are things I have to do, people I have to see, and a death I have to solve. A supposed death, that is. Dante's finger hovered over the center of the Milky Way, near the great cavity, the great darkness that would devour everything tossed into it. The map lit up with dots marking civilizations, planets and sectors, each labeled in vibrant colors and intricate detail. He worked his magic, the same magic that had earned him his original crew. Sure, they'd betrayed him, but Dante didn't need perfection. He just needed competence, people who would do what he asked when he asked them to. Beyond that, the man would choose only those with the skills he required. Reggio's multicolored lenses locked onto Dante's bright blue eyes as the human planted his case. Reggio, you want the fight, the thrill, the adrenaline. That's why you joined me, right? Andromeda is a wasteland. Nothing to do, no one to fight. Here we are now, stuck in the wings, where it is not much better. Let's leave this graveyard of souls and head for the real action. Money, fame, power, purpose, it's all out there. We just have to find it. Reggio's head bobbed in agreement, his muscles twitching with anticipation. Unlike the Iraqi, however, Sona had reached her limit and couldn't handle it anymore. You idiots! They will find you, and they will kill you. You're fugitives to every known civilization now. The only ones who might help are the Federation. They're rebelling against the three empires. Maybe they'll... Sona's voice trailed off as she spoke, uncertain. She knew the Federation followed a higher power that had outlawed Dante's existence too. The human didn't care. His hands were already on the controls, guiding them into the light sea. The Starsinger shuddered from the strain of the constant jumps, but it endured, built to Dante's exact specifications. He used the monitors beside him to plot a path to the center of the galaxy, leading straight to the most powerful empire of them all, Rome. The nation which controlled millions of planets and countless lives had modeled its entire system after the ancient Roman Empire of Earth. It was yet another thing that frustrated the human to no end. While grinding his teeth, Dante finalized the chart. There would be many stops along the way. After all, with a ship like his, it would take years to reach the heart of the galaxy. The distant jumps would require repairs, which take time and money. In order to obtain the money, he would need jobs, assassinations, robbery, smuggling. It didn't matter to him as long as he didn't harm children, his one rule. Still, he knew how hypocritical he was, but in the sea of stars, it was impossible to keep your innocence. A fleeting thought of his younger brother crossed his mind, but he pushed the sorrow aside and initiated the leap to their first destination. As the colors of the light sea warped around them, Dante didn't bother convincing Sona. He already knew she would join them. Sure, she could attempt to return to her organization, but if they uncovered what she had done, she would face dire consequences. Hidden organizations like hers did not take kindly to betrayals of such a magnitude. Sona curled up in the corner, her knuckles white as they gripped the armrest. Fear gnawed at her, relentless, but the ship's steady hum grounded her for the time being. Dante pitied her and wondered where all that confidence went. But she was the reason he was in this mess to begin with. If she hadn't snuck on board, if her Federation hadn't been so determined to take down the Trinary Empires, the mission would have gone smoothly. Quick and easy. Finally, the man crossed the threshold into the light sea, the ship disappearing from sight. He stumbled, overwhelmed by a flurry of unnatural sensations. Dante had experienced this phenomenon countless times before, but this time was different. This time, he felt a connection to the light sea, a symbiotic link, as if he could draw power from it. Dante's mind wandered for a moment, knowing he shouldn't do it, but the allure was too strong. The act was stupid. He was infinitely stupid, and he knew it. Despite his feelings, he knew some things could not be stopped. Without meaning to, he siphoned the brilliance from the lights that danced through the sea. Currents of energy washed over his flesh, swirling through his bones, veins, and even neurons. He marveled at the surge of power flowing through him, a heady mix of awe and exhilaration. Droplets of clear water dribbled from his fingertips like sweat, but the fluid was most unquestionably not. Still, with the sensations rumbling through his body, Dante didn't acknowledge such a thing. It differed completely from when that thing had touched him. This didn't feel wrong or evil, it felt peaceful, almost joyful, tranquil perhaps. While sinking deeper into the lights, he felt a sense of foreboding creeping over him, becoming stronger with each passing second. His breath quickened, and his heart pounded against his ribs like a frantic prisoner desperate for escape. He needed out. Now. How, though? That was the question on his mind. Then he sensed it, a presence of unimaginable scale and power. It felt as though the very fabric of the universe had shifted its focus onto him. Panic surged through him, a fear he couldn't contain without nullify. His mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of what he had awakened. Though he tried, he couldn't. Dante was, after all, just a man, connected to powers he was never meant to understand. In the void between realms, something stirred. An unblinking, pupil-less eye, vast and ancient, unfolded from the expanse of darkness. Its gaze fell on Dante, crushing him beneath the weight of 1,000 suns. Like a blooming blossom, the eye unveiled more with each crossing instant. The second their gazes met, Dante's mind folded. The sheer force of the presence's awareness overwhelmed him. Unlike anything he had ever experienced, agony exploded in his skull, causing him to scream, a raw primal sound. Despite the impossibility, the scream went nowhere, swallowed by the emptiness of the light sea. Something inside him, though, mitigated the impact, for the man was well aware he should have already died from the mere glimpse. Dante clutched his head, desperate to block out the eye's piercing scrutiny. Yet it was too late. The damage was done. When the ship finally dropped back into standard space, Dante's right eye was ruptured, blood trailing down his face and dripping onto the floor. His eyes blurred, and he berated himself for his foolishness. Fuck. I know how dangerous this is. What am I doing? Fuck. Dante struggled to believe how easily his willpower had crumbled while slamming his fists against the desk and scraping off its contents. He'd fought off addiction time and time again, with little to no help, believing his will was unbreakable. However, it broke into pieces within seconds. Dante! A scared, trembling voice reached Dante's searing ears. He turned his head painfully, the pounding in his skull relentless, and saw Sonna standing there genuinely concerned as she asked, "Are you okay? What happened? You didn't pull from the sea, did you?" Dante hesitated, unsure how to respond. More importantly, how should he respond? He couldn't show weakness, not to her, not now. As long as he was dead. By slapping the side of his head, he snapped back to reality. Whatever that had been, it wasn't his thinking. He wouldn't waste such a valuable resource, and strangely, she seemed to care. Maybe it was some kind of naive innocence. He wasn't sure yet. Numerous questions remained unanswered. Each one solved tacked on a dozen more. Why would she be so naive? Wasn't she an operative? Is it all just a facade? Maybe. At the moment, he could not concentrate. The pain from his ruptured eye matched the warning signals blaring from the ship's systems. It was their final jump for now, but Dante had no regrets. They needed to distance themselves and the incident as much as possible. It would buy them time. Not forever if someone truly wanted him. Seers could sniff out almost anything. But for now, it would do. I looked at something I shouldn't have. I'll be fine, Dante muttered, dismissing the pain. More importantly, we need to clean up the ship. A repair team won't come in with bodies lying everywhere. The human started dragging a corpse from the skull, dismissing his injuries. Reggio joined him without a word, as if this were routine, while Sonna shot Dante a glance of half frustration, half fear, saying, "You're going to get yourself killed taking risks like that so soon. Not even praetors meet the hidden without preparation. And clean up? How? We're in orbit. How are we supposed to get rid of these bodies without being seen?" The Iraqi laughed, hefting 2 bodies with ease and adding, "We've got an incinerator for things like this. Sometimes it's better to earn the merchandise. Works for roadies too. Come on, help." Sonna groaned, pulling herself out of her chair and gingerly wrapping her hands around a corpse's leg. It was clear she had done nothing like this before. Her role was not to get her hands dirty. She was supposed to work in the shadows. At least that is what she told everyone. Her stomach lurched. Before they started moving the bodies, she vomited 2 times. When Reggio handed her a mop and bucket, Sonna stared at them in disbelief, while Dante remained lost in his own thoughts, focused on the sensation he had felt earlier. Nausea and agony warred with his pride. Sonna shook her head, desperate. "No, I'm not cleaning blood and guts, no way." Sadness flickered across Reggio's face before he turned to Dante. The man of his focus didn't even open his eyes, already seated at the console as communications came in from the planet below. The bluish-green orb was Christland, a planet owned by a baron of the Empire of Ostasian. This far out, though, Ostasian itself had scant power, not to mention it being near the Roman Empire's border. Most responsibility fell into the baron's hands. "Someone handle it. I'm busy," Dante muttered, barely acknowledging their requests. "The comms need answering. We're travelers. Permits are under the desk. The ship's signature is Sing-Song 67. Once he finished speaking, his brows furrowed as he desperately searched within himself for the stream that had sent his body back in time before. Reggio and Sonna exchanged a glance only a few feet apart. The former's eyes shifted to the monitors, his face contorting into a grimace as he spoke. "I'll clean he blood. You handle the talking, little one." For the first time, Sonna laughed, a slight, unexpected sound. She pointed at Reggio as she walked toward the desk Dante had mentioned and said, "Are you scared of talking to people? That's hilarious. Maybe you two aren't so bad after all." While Sonna worked at the monitors, Reggio was already cleaning, muttering to himself about Weron and their tiny heads. Sonna glanced at Dante, focused and distant, before shaking her head. 2 companions might have been presumptuous. While feeling her eyes on him, Dante opened his own for a split second, shooting a glare at Sonna, which served to deepen her worries. He shut them again, refocusing on the connection he now felt with the light sea. Before, he'd triggered it by accident. Now he had to do it intentionally. Dante was a man who seized every opportunity, and this one was massive, for it would change everything. In order to do so, he poured all of himself into it. Nevertheless, he couldn't find peace. Minutes crawled by as more blood seeped from his wounds. Fortunately, Sonna had already secured their safe passage to the planet and its megacity. Reggio was still cleaning, but Dante finally stood, stumbling to where he'd hidden his supply of nullify. He felt Sonna's eyes on him, her brewing anger still palpable. Self-loathing coursed through Dante, but he needed to fix his eye without draining his already low funds. Nullify was pricey, but not as lavish as a new organ. Furthermore, he had been expecting a massive payout for this job. As such, he was damn near broke. There would be no expensive or high-quality tools. Dante would have to work with whatever he could get from a general store or some other street shop. So he pulled out a syringe, lamenting how few doses he had left and hating that he needed to use it at all. A junkie. That's what he was. What he would always be. Despite the thoughts in his mind, he still yearned to be more, so much more, and that thought honed his mind as the pitch-black liquid sank into his veins. His mind sharpened, not just from the nullify clearing the noise from his hunger, but also from the clarity it brought. Dante found a strange peace as he became a conduit for something far beyond himself. He's seen many of them before, hundreds in fact. Seafarers, scions, tidewalkers, windbreakers, cultivators, seers, anomalies. They were those touched by extra-dimensional powers, by the light sea, one of the weaves that hold reality together. There were many names for the same thing, as designations only affected how their powers manifested. Dante had always been cautious around them, like walking on glass barefoot. One wrong move, and it was game over. Sure, he had killed a few who had gone too far, collecting bounties on their heads, but he had spent weeks or months meticulously planning those hits. He would only go after the bounties on the weak or new ones, never the strong. That'd be suicide. His targets were those who had not yet fully mastered their abilities or were without mentors. A crackle of lightning ripped through Dante's senses, snapping his eyes open. Instant relief flooded him as his vision returned, clear through both eyes once again. He tried to stand, but collapsed back into his chair with a trembling gasp. Darkness swept over him, pulling him under. By the depths. Footsteps rushed toward him, and then hands gripped his face. A sharp slap followed, along with a distant voice shouting, "Wake up! What did I tell you? Don't touch the light sea. You haven't been trained. You'll kill yourself by using your stigmata." The pain jolted Dante back into consciousness, Suna's tiny eyes boring holes into him. Another slap forced him to blink, his mind coming back online. "What were you thinking? So fucking stupid," Sona spat, glaring at him. In response, Dante shook his head. He had thought it through. Even with weakness spreading through his body, a sensation echoing everywhere and nowhere all at once, he said calmly, "No, it wasn't stupid. It was logical. I needed to recover. Who knows what effect the travel had on me? Besides, there's someone on Christland I need to meet. An old friend. I need to be healed to see him." A jittering chuckle escaped Reggio as the Iraqi sat across from Dante, disbelief etched across his face. "What do you in? You don't have friends. Besides me, Avars. Okay then, an acquaintance. Regardless, we need to get to him. We need a new crew. And he's the best damned engineer on this side of the wings. Only, there's a small catch," Dante said, as an uncertain glimmer flickered his eyes. Sona's face fell as she seized Dante's plan. Reggio groaned, aware of the precise direction Dante's plan was taking. "Not him. Come on. You've told me about him. You ate him. No, not Archimedes. Anyone but that nervous wreck." Reggio protested, his concern growing as Dante stood and holstered the pistols he'd left on the desk. With a resounding exhale, he shuffled toward the exit, waving for the others to follow. "I don't hate him. I just found him difficult to work with, and it hurt to see him and be unable to free him without getting him killed. Though I'm sure he's matured by now. Got sentenced for hacking into christland's banking system. Oh, and Sona, find me a cane, will you? It's hard to walk right now, and I need to project some bravado." "Starsinger, take us to port," Dante stated as he continued toward the exit, voice guiding the ship's descent and his crew. Sona ran after him a moment later, furious, and swiped one of his precious syringes in spite. Reggio was left with finding a cane. He eventually picked up a long, bent pipe from something unrecognizable. With a shrug, he brought it to the exit hatch. Along the way, Sona kept shouting at Dante, demanding answers, but he shut her down each time. She knew the truth. If she didn't help him, she'd be dead. They both knew it. Under her breath, she cursed him, but still followed. Still, she had one question as she asked, "Why? Why do you need a crew? What's your actual plan?" The hatch hissed open while she spoke, delivering them onto the surface of a new planet, with the ghostly ship behind them, now emptied of life and in dire need of repairs. Bloody stains still littered the insides, though none but these three would ever witness them. Above and away from the stench of death, starships streaked through the sky, their shadows casting fleeting darkness over the sunlit world. After inhaling the planet's concrete scent with an imperceptible smile, Dante answered her sincerely, "Explore, learn, excavate, get stronger. I don't know, I just want to do more than whatever I have been doing. There is so much out there, so much that we know nothing about. I want to learn it all. I'll also find out what happened to my father, what turned him into that thing, what made him vanish." Dante had countless wishes and goals that he wanted to accomplish in his mind. There were so many he didn't even know which to truly start with, only those that he had to at some point. Sona laughed, clearly not taking him seriously. Regardless, Dante didn't care. He strode forward, leaning on his makeshift cane as they stepped onto a planetary dock meant for out-of-system guests. Starships soared overhead, blotting out the sun and filling the air with deafening noise. As Dante felt the old-fashioned revolver hidden under his belt and another tucked in his shirt pocket, a sense of comfort washed over him. He glanced at the watch on his wrist. a habit passed down from his father, and mentally ticked off the time. Time to get a move on. I've got a soldier and a spy. Well, a terrible spy, but she'll do. Next is the engineer. What's after that? A doctor, maybe. I know one here, but she's... Shit. She would be perfect here if I got her to join. She knows the planet well, too. Probably has connections in Lightjar knowing her businesses. But she's a walking nightmare. Dante's mind drifted over the possibilities as they passed through customs in the starport. His guns cleared without issue from the flash of a judge's juror badge. It wasn't real, at least not in the strictest sense, but it worked well enough. The Roman Empire's executioner/investigators could move freely, even across other empires, as long as it was on official business and a war wasn't brewing. The three were quickly waved through, despite the badge being only a servant's rank. Few were willing to copy such items, fewer do it in a way that would appear authentic. 15 minutes later, the three of them were walking down a crowded street in the megacity's heart. Flashing lights and endless advertisements fought for attention amidst the deafening noise. Waves of people surged around them, reducing the trio to mere specks in the overwhelming flow of the city. Reggio appeared uneasy, shifting uncomfortably, while Sonna shrank into herself, beyond out of her element. On the other hand, Dante strode with poise, the cane not hindering him at all, his shoulders squared, pupils dilated. His sharp blue eyes locked onto a nearby general store, craving the chemicals and supplies he knew would be inside. A plan was already in motion, Christland just didn't know it yet. However, whether it was Dante's or someone else's was to be determined.